He clicked past my slide like it wasn't even there. We were barely 10 minutes into the Monday review when Martin skipped the Fortis metrics entirely. No mention of the campaign, no results breakdown. The slide just blinked once, then vanished, like the last 3 months of my work meant nothing. No one said a word. I smiled, not because I was okay with it, but because I'd seen it coming. This wasn't the first time. 3 weeks earlier, I noticed that my initials had been quietly removed from the Vega proposal header. Not the file itself, just the client-facing version. Liam had presented it as his own, throwing in a few buzzwords he barely understood. I didn't correct him then either. I'd been with the company for 13 years, managed 8 high-value contracts, helped clean up the Brentford mess when legal thought we'd lose the client. I was never the loudest in the room, but I was always the one they called when something was on fire. Now they acted like I was optional. Available for insight, Martin called it last month. Code for out of the way, but still reachable if they need a patch. The title on my profile still said Senior Account Lead. The salary, though, hadn't moved since my 5th year. Every cycle I'd ask. Every cycle they'd say, "Let's revisit next quarter." This time, they didn't even say that. So I started saving things. I kept versioned folders, dated drafts, screenshots of who edited what. Not because I was planning anything, at first, but because I needed to know where I still existed in the system. I saw it shift piece by piece. Client credits stopped including me. Team chats rerouted around me. People I trained were suddenly strategic owners. And now, today, in front of the leadership table, they erased the one deal I'd carried alone. I waited until the room cleared, then walked back in, plugged in my drive, and pulled down the projection logs. Most people don't know the system keeps a shadow copy of slides for audit purposes, 14-day buffer, then auto-purge. But I knew. I'd asked the AV team about it last year when we were tracking down a misquote. I grabbed the full deck, mine, theirs, everything. Sorted it quietly into folders on my external under a new name, Continuity. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about not letting them rewrite the last 5 years of my work while I was still sitting there, smiling. Before I left, I forwarded a copy of the slide metadata to Paige, our ops assistant. She'd once told me she hated how credits got reassigned without notice. I didn't write anything in the email, just the file and the subject line, timeline check, that was all. By Thursday, a new folder had appeared on the shared drive. Q2 pipeline, central brief. Inside, 5 decks, none of them mine. I opened the 40s file. The summary page was identical to the draft I'd submitted last month, except it now listed Liam and Maddie as lead strategists. No footnotes, no version log, no sign I'd ever touched it. There was no anger in me, just a kind of hollow precision. I started checking timestamps. The original doc I'd uploaded still existed on our archive server. Same structure, same language. Only difference, that one had my name. So I exported a PDF copy and filed it in my private continuity folder, next to the other 3 that had vanished in similar fashion. People think erasure happens with shouting and doors slamming. It doesn't. It happens in silent updates, quiet promotions, and recycled phrases like streamlining visibility. At noon, I got a calendar invite from Martin's assistant, leadership briefing, strategic ops alignment. I'd never heard that phrase before. No agenda attached. The meeting was held in the smaller West Conference Room, the one with no windows and the flickering projector. I arrived on time, took a seat near the end of the table. No one greeted me. Martin started with the numbers: revenue pacing, client churn, resource efficiency. His tone was clipped, rehearsed. He called on Liam twice. Paige sat opposite me, flipping through pages of printed handouts. They didn't assign speaking roles, but every time someone referenced a Fortis substream, I noticed Martin's eyes skip right past me. Until one moment, he hesitated. Paige had pushed forward a printout of the old forecast model, the one I'd authored. She didn't say anything, just aligned it neatly in front of him. Martin glanced down, paused, and then tapped his pen once against the paper before shifting back to the screen. He knew. After the meeting, I walked past Paige near the elevator. She didn't look up, but murmured low enough for only me to hear. "Your formulas are still live." They didn't scrub the links. I didn't respond, just kept walking. That night, I logged into the back end of the forecasting tool. My author tags were still embedded in 3 core modules, not visible to most, but traceable. I activated the version tracker I'd left dormant for months. Then I changed one number. Not enough to alter the outputs, just enough to trigger an alert, a ping that would land in Martin's inbox the moment someone opened the file and saw a logic discrepancy. No message, no signature. Let the system ask the questions for me. It started with a spreadsheet someone accidentally sent me. A junior from finance forwarded it with a note that simply said, "I think you made the original." I noticed the structure looks familiar. I opened the file and immediately saw my fingerprint in every cell. Not just the layout, but the logic chains, the conditional color rules, the exact phrasing in the footnotes. It was mine, dressed up with new headers and new owners, but still mine. I did not reply. I saved the file to my offline archive and tagged it under a new folder. I named it Quiet Drift. Later that afternoon, a meeting invite hit my inbox. I was not listed as a participant, just copied for visibility. The agenda was vague: cross-team alignment, performance metrics, client retention tracking. No names were assigned to ownership. That was new. By Wednesday, it became clearer. The shared strategy documents were changing format. Author fields were missing. Attribution lines were replaced by generic labels. No more signatures, just groups. Team A, Strategy Hub, Collective Alignment. It was not subtle, it was systemic. The more I looked, the more I saw. Old slide decks republished under new titles. Legacy charts rebranded with updated themes, but still using my models. They had copied the surface and buried the source, but they were lazy. One file still had a timestamp from my upload. Another had a comment I left months ago buried in a margin cell. Small things, but they proved origin. I began cataloging each one. No message, no confrontation, just quiet documentation. Every recycled file, every renamed draft, every meeting where my work reappeared without my name. I recorded them all. By Thursday, something shifted in the hallway. I passed Paige near the kitchen. She paused, hesitated, then handed me a folded page. No context, just one line written at the top. He asked to remove contributor logs from Q1, said it was for clarity. I read it twice, then once more. He meant the Fortis account. He wanted to wipe the metadata, eliminate the digital trail. That night, I opened the company archive system. I filtered by login activity. Martin had accessed every major client file that week. His account had overridden version histories. I downloaded the access log and saved a copy to my encrypted drive. I renamed the folder, not Quiet Drift anymore. Now it was called Exit Pattern. The next day, just after 4, a draft presentation appeared briefly in the open server. Someone forgot to lock it. Slide 12. Projected client retention from Fortis rollout. 19.2% lift. No footnote. No team name. Just the number. It sat there for 4 minutes before someone removed it. I stared at that slide long after it vanished. Not because I was surprised, not because I was angry, but because I knew that number better than anyone. I had calculated it from scratch, modeled it, tested it, protected it, and now it was headed to the CEO without a name, without a source, without me. By Monday morning, the tone had changed. I noticed it first in the meeting notes. Suddenly I was being tagged again. Not directly, not with any credit, but in quiet ways. Someone had restored my access to the shared Fortis folder. A task was assigned to no one, but the description read like it had been written for me. Then came the email. Mady wrote, looping in Martin and 2 others, asking for input on retention risk indicators. No one said I was the expert, but they all knew who had built that model. There was a time when they would have asked me outright. Now they were trying to make it look like collaboration. I ignored the first message, the second. On the third, I replied with a single line. Use the Brentford structure. Adjust the churn buffer by 2 weeks. That was it. No greeting, no signature. An hour later, they implemented it. The dashboard updated, and for the first time in weeks, the metrics aligned again. Later that afternoon, Martin walked past my desk. He stopped just briefly, said the numbers were cleaner this round, said thanks, then added that I might be pulled into a client call later in the week. I didn't look up. I just nodded once. This wasn't reconciliation, it was containment. They had taken everything they could strip from my name, but now that things were falling out of sync, they needed the original signal again, not the voice, just the trace, the part that could still keep the numbers from breaking. I made a new file that night, called it Pull Response, logged every message, every quiet re-invitation, every document reopened. Then something strange happened. Paige forwarded me an internal memo draft. She said she had found it floating on the backup server. The document was marked confidential. Subject line read, Q2 Executive Brief Revisions. On page 3 was a timeline of contributor transitions. It showed that I had exited the Fortis account in February. It claimed I had taken on a supporting role on lower-tier clients. It showed zero mention of strategy ownership. I stared at the sentence that said, "No further attribution required." That was the official story. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I just saved it under a new folder. I called that one Rewrite. The next morning, Liam approached my desk for the first time in months. He asked if I could walk him through some logic jumps in the Brentford forecast, said he had to present it to the client and wanted to be accurate. I asked him if Martin approved the ask. He said not exactly. I smiled once, then told him the structure would speak for itself. He left empty-handed, and I updated the tracker. Under pull attempts, I added his name. It was a small comment during a metrics review that shifted the tone again. One of the regional heads asked why Fortis churn had stabilized faster than forecast. Martin said it was due to rapid team response and recent adjustments, but he stumbled on the next slide. The chart showed a slope that matched the model I had created last quarter. The same forecast curve, same dip alignment. Someone cleared their throat. No one spoke. The meeting ended in silence, but not before a junior manager, who had never once messaged me before, forwarded me the deck and asked if I had a backup version of the old model, just in case, for reference. I didn't reply. I saved the message. Later that day, I watched the edit history of the retention dashboard. 3 people had tried to open the configuration. 1 failed. 2 made tentative changes and reversed them. They were testing things, trying to poke the structure without fully admitting they had lost track of how it worked. That evening, an old notification I had set months ago lit up. Access request, Fortis model, V1.7, requester director level. Note, looking to clarify dependencies. They were looking for answers in files I had written but no longer owned. I granted view-only access, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to watch. 2 days later, Paige messaged me late at night. She had been pulled into a meeting about attribution. Not a formal audit, but something close. There had been questions from compliance about sourcing logic in key deliverables. Apparently, one investor had flagged inconsistencies between public claims and internal documentation. She asked if I had kept version history. I replied with one sentence, every single one. She didn't respond after that. By Friday, a new message circulated. It came from Martin's office, addressed to leadership only. It spoke of a need for unified messaging, for alignment across performance narratives. It warned of confusion if conflicting contributions were discovered. Paige forwarded it to me without comment. I opened a new folder. This one was titled Collapse Prep. That afternoon, I passed by Liam in the break room. He looked tired, distracted. He asked how I was doing in a voice that sounded rehearsed. I said I was fine. Then I added something. I told him I had been reviewing my old Fortis drafts, just to compare how things had evolved. He blinked once, then said he thought those had been archived. I told him some things do not disappear just because you label them complete. I watched the color drain slightly from his face. That night, I updated my records. Under status, I wrote, internal doubt rising, external audit approaching, primary actors unstable. It wasn't personal. It was just what the numbers showed. The first official audit request came on a Monday. It was framed as a quarterly compliance review, but no one believed that. They asked for documentation on key accounts, not just current performance, but original sources. Forecast methods, attribution logs. They asked for authorship. The Fortis account was at the top of the list. Paige sent me a screenshot of the request. She did not ask if I had the files. She already knew. That morning, Martin called a leadership sync. He spoke in vague terms about operational clarity and historical context. Then he used a phrase I had not heard before: collective intellectual ownership. It was designed to blur the line, to suggest that no idea belonged to any one person, that models emerged from teamwork, that documentation, while helpful, could sometimes misrepresent how strategy evolved. Liam sat 3 seats down, eyes fixed on the table. No one responded. That afternoon, I received another message, this time from legal. They were assembling materials for internal verification. They asked if I had access to legacy documentation that could help confirm version integrity. I said yes. I did not send the files. I sent a list, a timeline, file names, authors, upload dates, a breadcrumb trail, everything factual, no commentary. They replied with a thank you and said they would follow up. I knew what they were doing. They wanted proof, but without taking sides. They wanted the system to correct itself without forcing a confrontation. But it was too late for that. 2 days later, one of the clients copied me on an email by accident. They were asking for clarity on who had built the Fortis retention model. They referenced a conversation from months ago where I had walked them through the assumptions. They wanted to reconnect, just for questions, nothing formal. Martin replied all, said the current team could address any concerns. Then he removed me from the thread, but the client emailed me directly 5 minutes later. We were told you were no longer involved. That felt strange. Your name is still on our original rollout document. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I did not respond. I forwarded the message to legal, then saved a copy to my archive. Later that night, I noticed 2 things. First, several Fortis files had been taken offline temporarily, renamed, cleaned. One was removed entirely. Second, Maddie deleted 3 messages from our shared chat history. Small ones, innocuous at first glance, but all of them referenced my work, my files, my process. They were trying to clean the timeline, but I had already saved it. By the end of the week, another internal meeting was called. This one without me, but I knew what it was. Not damage control, not yet. Just fear trying to look like structure. I updated my folder, collapse prep, phase 2. The client never waited for permission. Instead of sending the request through Martin, they contacted Paige. Director, measured. They said it was about version clarity. They were reviewing internal data for a partner-facing report and had questions about the Fortis retention model. Not just the results, but the assumptions. Paige forwarded the message to Martin within minutes. He called her into his office. Door shut, blinds pulled. She didn't tell me what was said. She didn't need to. An hour later, I received a meeting invite from Martin himself. No assistant, no team lead, just his name. The title was vague. Fortis Legacy Alignment. No agenda, no attachments, one-on-one. When I walked in the next morning, he was already seated. He greeted me like nothing had happened. Like the last 3 months hadn't happened. He spoke slowly, said the client wanted clarity and we all needed to speak with one voice. He said attribution had become messy and this was a chance to realign. Then he asked if I would help draft the historical documentation. He used words like collaborative and unified and solution-focused. I let him finish. Then I asked one question: who will be listed as lead strategist? He hesitated, just for a second, then smiled and said the model stands on its own. I told him no. He blinked once, asked if I was refusing to help the team. I said the files were already there. The timestamps, the logs, the versions, the documentation. If the team needed clarity, they could start by reading. The meeting ended quietly. No threats. Just silence. That night, I checked system logs. The Fortis file had been accessed 4 times in 2 hours. Once from legal, once from compliance, once from the audit queue, and once from the CEO's direct review folder. The next morning, I said nothing, but the office had shifted. Paige passed by my desk without stopping. She tapped once on her notebook. It was her way of saying something had broken loose. A question had been raised at the top. The CEO had seen the slide, the one with the Fortis results, the retention curve, the projected value. 3 clients had asked why the public version no longer included my name. All 3 had contracts signed during my briefings. All 3 had kept emails. 1 had forwarded theirs to the board. The question was no longer internal. It was reputational. By afternoon, Liam's access to the dashboard was suspended. Maddie's role in the case study was quietly removed. Someone in HR sent me a message asking if I could be available for a timeline clarification. I said yes. When the call came, it wasn't a deposition, it was a listening session. I spoke slowly, one version number at a time, one model, one file, one decision. I gave them everything, no commentary, just facts. They thanked me and said someone from the board might reach out. I said that was fine. Later that night, I received a forwarded memo from Paige. It was labeled confidential. The subject line was internal narrative integrity. It included recommendations on how to address attribution inconsistencies in investor-facing materials. It proposed reissuing the Fortis case study with revised context. My name was included, not as a contributor, as origin. I didn't react, I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the final folder in my archive. Collapse confirmed. The collapse didn't start with a firing or a statement. It began with silence. Martin's weekly check-ins were suddenly canceled. Not rescheduled, canceled outright. His calendar went blank for 3 days. When it came back, his title had changed. Strategic Advisor, Interim, the kind of role that says, stay quiet while we decide what to do with you. There was no memo, just an absence. No one said the word demotion, but the absence spoke louder. That same day, an internal audit summary was quietly published. It looked like a routine update. 5 pages, neutral language, nothing dramatic. But in the section labeled Attribution Reconciliation, my name was listed first. Lead strategist, Fortis account. The other 2 names came after. No footnotes, no explanations. It wasn't framed as a correction, but that's what it was. The shift continued. Liam's profile was updated with a new department, Internal Projects. His dashboard access had already been revoked. He no longer appeared on client-facing threads. Maddie's contract was modified to part-time consulting. 2 weeks later, her desk was cleared. Paige told me she left without saying a word. Client decks were reissued, slides updated. Internal templates restored my original model formats, right down to the column spacing and notation patterns. No one admitted anything. They just rewrote the narrative to align with what had always been true. Paige forwarded me one of the old decks. It had been uploaded again, but this time it ended with a single line of attribution. Retention Strategy Model, developed by Jay Chen. She messaged me after. It's happening. Quietly, but finally. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That same week, Fortis sent over a branded box with a letter. They thanked me for the early work and said the foundation I laid had shaped their entire regional retention strategy. It was formal, but sincere. No one else on the team received anything. On Friday, I was invited to a leadership roundtable. I wasn't on the agenda. I was just asked to attend. Midway through, one of the regional heads pointed to a graph on screen. It was the retention curve I had modeled 2 quarters ago. He asked, "This was based on the Brentford structure, right?" The room paused. Martin looked down. No one corrected him. No one dared. Martin stepped down from the advisor role 2 days later. They said it was a strategic transition, but everyone knew. No farewell email, no legacy summary, just a silent exit. The following Monday, legal closed the audit loop. The version logs were locked. Attribution records were formally signed and archived. My documentation folder was now marked read-only and official. I never asked for recognition, but the system gave it anyway, not to reward me, but to protect itself. The CEO's office began copying me directly on investor briefing drafts, not asking permission, asking for clarity, and still, I never raised my voice. I just kept doing what I always had, solving the problems no one else knew how to define. Until one afternoon, as I was preparing to leave, a new message appeared. It was from the CEO's Chief of Staff. Subject, Strategic Design Initiatives. Body. We've reviewed your work. We'd like to hear where you think we should go next. The meeting was held in a smaller room this time. No projection screens, no assistants, no formal seating chart. Just a single round table and 5 decision makers. They didn't offer a speech. They didn't apologize. The CEO spoke first. He said the board was restructuring oversight on key accounts, said they were looking to rebuild from principle, not politics. Then he asked if I would be willing to lead the strategy function for the upcoming portfolio shift. It wasn't a promotion, It was something else. They had tried to erase the name, then overwrite the work. Now they were circling back, not because they had changed, but because the system no longer worked without what I had built. I asked for time to consider. That alone told them they no longer had leverage. I walked out of that room without committing to anything. But by the next morning, 2 of the executives had reached out directly. One asked if I would review the multi-region forecast they had commissioned externally. The other asked if I was open to consulting independently. They weren't aligned, that was clear. The structure was tilting faster than they could recalibrate. In the days that followed, my old inbox filled again. Quiet requests, invitations, questions phrased as suggestions. I accepted some, declined others. I watched who reached out, who hesitated, who remained silent. I noticed who asked for clarity without ever naming the work, and I noticed who finally said it out loud. Paige pulled me aside near the elevator on a Wednesday. She said she was leaving the company, not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. Said she had seen how slow recognition came, even when the evidence was undeniable. Then she handed me a small file. Inside was a printed slide deck, one of the originals, the earliest version of the Fortis structure. My handwriting was still on the margin. They never deleted it, she said, just buried it. She smiled, wished me luck, and walked away. That night, I didn't open my laptop. I sat with the document for a long time. I had rebuilt their retention model, stabilized their client base, endured the quiet erasure. I hadn't pushed back. I hadn't demanded anything. And still, the system circled back, not to admit fault, but to regain function. They were not inviting me to lead. They were asking me to make their structure make sense again. When the official offer came, it was dressed in formal language: compensation review, strategic redesign, executive alignment. But the core was simple. We need you to rebuild the thing you built, but this time with authority. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I wrote one sentence in my own notes. The game does not begin when they see you. It begins when they can no longer continue without you. I didn't take the title they offered. I took a contract. It gave me full autonomy over strategic architecture across 3 regions. No direct reports, no team politics, just clean decision rights, project-based terms, and a review every 6 months, initiated by me, not them. They called it unusual. I called it overdue. From that point forward, I operated without the need for hallway permission. I spoke when necessary. I intervened only when the logic fractured, and when it did, they listened. Not because I asked, because the system now depended on clarity and I had become the clearest line in it. Martin never returned. Liam was reassigned again. Maddie moved to another firm. None of them ever reached out. Paige and I met once. 6 months later, she had launched her own practice. Quiet, efficient. She said she never thought leaving would feel like returning to oxygen. We didn't talk about Fortis. We didn't need to. The name was still on the materials, but the conversation had moved on. I watched as my models were adopted across new verticals, not because they were flashy, because they worked, they endured scrutiny, they adapted. People began referring to the structure by shorthand: J-phase logic, Chen curve, retention layer 3. My name became a function, not a signature. That was fine. Reputation, I had learned, is never built in applause. It's built in data that holds when the rest collapses. By the time the next board cycle began, I was already embedded in 4 strategic reviews, not as a guest, as a required step in the process. They had designed the system to run without me, and I had let them, until the system failed under its own weight and came back looking for architecture. I didn't celebrate that. I redesigned it. One morning, a new hire stopped me after a session. She said she had been asked to study the Fortis turnaround as part of onboarding, said they spoke about it like a mystery. No one quite knew how the recovery had stabilized so fast. She asked me if it was true that I had written the original framework. I told her it didn't matter who wrote it. What mattered was who understood why it worked. She didn't ask again, but she stayed behind to review every slide. As I walked past the glass room where they were reviewing the latest model expansion, I saw my structure on the board. No one noticed me standing there. That was the point. Legacy isn't visibility, it's inevitability, and by the time they realize they need you, you've already built something they can't remove without collapsing everything else they trust. So I let them keep the credit. I kept the system.